waking, spinning, shaking, lonely through Jesus is free. Eternity stay when everything's crumbling. Don't give up, fight to hold on. We must ignore the voices that come for surrender. It's
Welcome to Discerning Truths of Bill Donahue, better known as Donahue Papa on most platforms. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to go through my introduction material pretty quickly today because I have a ton of material to cover and I just want to get through it. I will not finish in an hour, I guarantee you, which is my normal time frame. But I broadcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the following platforms. On most of them, I am Donahue Papa. On Pilled or Foxhole, I am Bill Donahue. In Discerning Truths, 534 on YouTube, if you can find me over there. Monday and Wednesday, I usually go through a book of the Bible. Currently, I am actually, this is incorrect. I am in 2 Corinthians right now. I'll be in Thessalonians next, so that slides a little error. And then on Tuesdays, I usually join Neo on her stream now that she's back from her wedding and mini honeymoon. We will hopefully start doing that again, and I'll be over there on Tuesdays. I have no doubt this stream is going to raise questions. The best way to get a hold of me with those questions is email bill@discerningtruths.com. When I'm done with the teaching, I will look in the chat. If there's any questions I can answer right off the bat, I will do it. If not, email's always the best way. And the most important part of this stream is on near the bottom. I started on Cloud Hub. My replays are on Cloud Hub. Other channels don't keep me as long. Hopefully, this will be up on Rumble and YouTube and Foxhole for a short term, and after today. But all my other replays are on Cloud Hub. And then I always create a PDF of everything you're going to see on the screen. And in today's case, some things I'm not going to put on the screen are going to be in the PDF and available to you after the show. If I did everything that I have slides for, we'd be here to about 3 hours. But I'm trying to get out of here. So with that, I want to jump right into the study. And like I said, we are looking at the question, is the real Mount Sinai? Please stand up. Is it the red dot on this map is where the traditional Mount Sinai is located in Sinai, on the Sinai Peninsula. That location was picked by Constantine's mother, who saw herself as a makeshift archaeologist. I don't know. She picked a lot of sites, the site of the tomb, Jesus' tomb. She picked the site for Mount Sinai. It has a lot of things, but there's more than a dozen mountains that have been suggested for Mount Sinai over the years. But the one that's all over the internet and has been for the last, 20 years or so, is Jabal al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia, which is Midian back then. Oh yeah, thanks, Hog. It's thrown me off. But in Saudi Arabia. So the question is, that's a blue dot, and is there evidence? Like I said, when I've studied this before, but I did a internet search looking for it. There was like 285 YouTube videos came up claiming to support evidence for Jabal al-Lawz. There was hundreds of internet sites that said it. I'm aware of at least a half dozen books on the subject, all claiming that the real Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. So my question is there evidence that it's there? Oh, and I forgot to bump my friend Michael Beatty. He's on Monday to Friday. He's going through Exodus, so this is kind of a timely thing. Monday to Friday, 5:30 a.m., and then on Sunday, his wife Linda will join him, and they're going through Psalms. You should tune in to Michael. He's doing a great job. So with that, I'm going to get back into our study. And the Bible gives us some general clues about the location of Mount Sinai, but not a specific, they didn't have GPS coordination, coordinates, but it'd been nice if he did it. We know it was outside of Egypt, because the Israelites came to Mount Sinai after leaving Egypt in Exodus 19:1. And we also, Scripture hints that it's not in Midian, because Moses' Midianite in-laws leave Sinai to go back to their own land, which is in Midian. So Exodus 18:27 and Numbers 10:29 and 31. So if you pick a spot for Mount Sinai that's in Midian, you got some explaining to do, right? Now, here's the issue. Tracing the route of the Israelites from Exodus out of Egypt in their arrival at Mount Sinai, where Moses received the law, it's one of the most popular subjects to include on Bible maps. And they are going to conflict with each other. They're all going to have problems, right? But this is one of the most hotly debated topics among scholars. Scholars have proposed several locations for the parting of both the Red Sea in the Suez Canal type area, peninsula of the Red Sea. I'm going to go back to our map for a second. Let me pull this up. You can see the Red Sea splits into two things. You have the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. They're both considered the Red Sea. So it's like, which one did they walk through? Where was it parted? And you have people that argue for both of those, right? So I just want to make sure that you understand this is a hotly debated topic among scholars. There have been claims that it wasn't the Red Sea at all, but the Reed Sea, and on several other lakes bordering Egypt, like Lake Sibonius and the Bitter Lakes. And so we have empty lake beds that they believe were filled with water at the time, and those have been proposed. Likewise, Mount Sinai has no less than a dozen locations. And other locations proposed for Mount Sinai include the site in the western, central, and northern parts of Sinai Peninsula, okay? One theory identifies Mount Sinai as Mount Urahem in the northern Negev desert. Others see Sinai as being in southern Edom, which is Jordan, or Seir from Deuteronomy 3:2. And Mount Seir is mentioned almost 40 times in the Old Testament, giving it evidence that it might be Sinai. And another view places Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, associating it with two different mountains, Jabal Makai or Jabal el-Laz. Jabal el-Laz is the one that we're really going to focus on today. That's the one that's getting all the attention and has been, and from a bunch of people trying to prove the Bible. So if you listen to me anytime, any length of time, I believe the Bible is true. I believe the Bible is accurate. And so I'm all in favor of proving the Bible, but we want to be not be making up evidence for it, right? And then there's some highlight a certain site's appropriate distance from Egypt, from conjecture locations on other sites, like from Kadesh Barnea, from Exodus 15 and Numbers 33 and Deuteronomy 1, when it tells you how long it took them to get between one site and the other, and estimate how fast they could move across the desert on foot, and guesstimate those distances. So that's part of the reasoning behind some sites. Other scholars highlight a site's congruence with volcanic-like phenomena accompanied with giving the law. And this is the idea that when God gave the law, there was fire and smoke coming off the top of the mountain. And rather than being from God, people think that was a natural volcano. I'm not sure that assumption is correct, but so they look for mountains that have are black with volcanic material and have that kind of evidence on them. Still others look for a site's compatibility with considerations such as Moses' interaction with his father-in-law Jethro, who was a priest of Midian, in Exodus 3:1 and 18:1. Okay, so you're looking at, he's a priest from Midian. Where did they meet? How did they go back? They're looking at all those passages. And the people promoting today's theory are not trained theologians, archaeologists, geologists, or Egyptologists, or any other related field of expertise. Some are absolutely dishonest. Okay? Some will quote a story. World News Daily Report is a satire. It's like Babylon Bee. Okay? And there was an article published in World News Daily Report that claimed that scientists, that Professor Abu Muhammad Gadar of Cairo University, found bones and chariots in the Gulf of Suez. Okay? But the Associated Press followed up with them to try to do their debunking and got an email back from the university that said no professor by that name has ever been involved in any excavations there, right? So I'm going to give you some names. You hear the name Ron Wyatt, Bob Cornuke, Simca Jokovici, I don't even know if I can pronounce Simca's name, Graham Hancock, Eric von Daniken, etc. You're not dealing with anything close to an expert in the field that they're talking about. Okay? And I know a lot of people are very impressed with Ron Wyatt. They're all that. He has been debunked by so many people. He's a Seventh-day Adventist. He was a Seventh-day Adventist. His own denomination has debunked him. They have his kid on record admitting that the some of the supposed chariot wheels that he photographed, he actually placed in there and staged the photographs. I mean, Ron Wyatt is the number one charlatan out there. And then you have people that will take him. I've presented evidence from Michael Rood from A Rude Awakening. I like his chronological gospels. I think he does some good things. But Michael Rood is a big proponent of Ron Wyatt. Okay, you got to be able to chew up the meat and spit out the bones with people. Okay, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And I may like Michael Rood on some things, but I got to dismiss him on this. Okay, and this is the same thing. I may like some of what Simca Jacobovici does. He's a Canadian filmmaker. Okay, and some of the stuff he does is okay. Some of it is just absolute junk. Okay, so the same kind of thing here. But when you're dealing with these people, you got to know these are not experts. They haven't studied the field. They're not recognized by anybody as having done things. Now, the one video that's out on Exodus that I have not personally watched is called Pattern of Evidence. I don't expect anything different from that. From what I've heard about that film, I expect it's junk like everything else I've seen. But, in fairness, I haven't actually viewed that video. Okay? But just, you see these people, you hear their names, just start, red flags ought to be flying in your eyes. Okay? Now, in the next slide, I'm going to show you two maps. Okay, and I'm just going to put up that slide right now just so that we can talk about it while I'm here. Okay. Now, the one on the right side is Namibia, where Ron Wyatt says there's a natural land bridge to cross the, Red Sea. Now, if you can see, and hopefully you're not on a phone, but this is a topographical map of the underwater conditions. When the lines are very close together, that means it's very steep. Do you see at both sides at Namibia, especially on the right side, it is a very steep cliff going down in there. And on the left side, it has some steepness, some flatness, and steepness again. And then it's relatively flat across the bottom, okay, or a gentler slope on the bottom. This is not a land bridge by any stretch of the imagination, a land bridge. But what they did is took the average elevation and it'll tell you it's like a 4% grade. It's not. It's just a lie. Somebody that is willing to lie to you and tell you there's a crossing place at Namibia doesn't exist. Okay? But guys like Bob Cornuke and company will hope that you don't pay attention because on the map on the left, the top site is Namibia, where they see the land bridge. And the bottom site at the opening of the Gulf of Aqaba is where they claim they crossed. Well, if you have the land bridge in one place and you're crossing in another place, what gives here, right? And then, like I said, at the Wyatt Museum, there are supposedly photos of chariot wheels, supposedly found by Ron Wyatt. Some of them, like I said, his son says he staged. Other ones show very modern forged metal wheels, completely like anything that would have been used on a chariot in Egypt. And then other ones are coral formations that are known to take wheel-like shapes. Okay, so but these claims get repeated around in Christian circles so much that they're taken on as to being flat. Now I got a blow up here. This is the bottom where they say they crossed, and I want you to see. So from basically Rosnarini down here in the bottom, if you go as a diagonal above Jarrett's Tehran, you can see underneath the water there's a line showing a relatively flat shelf, and then they're saying, well, this is another land bridge, okay, and so they'll argue that this is where they crossed. Well, I couldn't get an underwater sonar for the whole site. This is just the deep site, the deep part of the thing. And if you're looking at the left side of the screen on the slide, you can see it's almost a vertical drop down to 800 meters, right? And then there are some pretty significant uphills and downhills until you finally down at 1200 meters. And then you come back up. You're going to need climbing material to get over some of these things. We're talking about people on foot with carts and wagons and stuff crossing here. This is not a crossing place. It's not possible to cross, right? And like I said, this is just the deep part of the canal. There's another part of the canal once you pass the island that the Gulf of Aqaba, the entrance, that area that is in the Straits of Turin, is a big diving. A lot of people that do diving love to go there because it's full of coral. It is a beautiful dive spot, and they dive this. Well, that might be beautiful for diving and not great for walking, right? So I thought today what I'm going to do is take you into some real scholars, people that are actual scholars, and to do this. Normally I read the scholars and then I bring you back the information. And I'm going to shift this up a little bit because Brad Sparks is a friend of mine. He's a former researcher at the Christian Research Institute, okay? And I want you to understand, Brad Sparks has over 100,000 pages of research on the Egyptian Exodus. He has identified over 700 Egyptian sources corroborating the events associated with the Exodus. He operates in academic circles and conducts symposiums. There was one done called Out of Egypt, Israel's Exodus Between the Text and Memory, History and Imagination Symposium, held in 2013 down at Qualcomm Institute in the University of California, San Diego. This symposium produced a book with 44 contributors by academics at the highest level of their field in Egyptology, geology, archaeology. These people are all there. And it's an international group of scholars of diverse disciplines. And it makes this the first such transdisciplinary thing that is out there. And Brad does this kind of stuff. The reason you don't see books by Brad is it's hard to condense 100,000 pages down into something you can do. He had it condensed into a 750-page book, and the publishers rejected it because it's going to cost them like $300 or $400 to produce the book, and a nerd like me might buy it, but most people are not going to, and it wasn't profitable. I have pushed Brad for years to write something for the layman. He is dedicated to stay in academia, and we're getting long in the tooth. I hope he gets something out there. No, but I have been given access into his research. I'm only allowed to give you what's been made public, okay? But this Brad, who's a trained researcher, one of the leading experts on the Exodus, and I think he is the leading expert on the Exodus, okay? He did an in-depth claim into about Mount Sinai being in Saudi Arabia. And I normally would go read his version and a half dozen other like it, and then condense it down and give you a simplified version. But I think Brad has written his article in a way that's intelligible for the average person. And I think anybody listening to me for any length of time is going to be able to follow along. Now, if you want access to the actual article, another friend of mine, physicist Lambert Dolphin, has it on his site. And I give you a link on the bottom of this page to Lambert's site. Lambert and I do not agree on everything. Lambert's very much pre-trib, I'm post-trib, and we have areas we disagree. Brad and I, I'm sure, have areas we disagree. But they are good scholars. They're actual people. So here, I just copied verbatim Brad's article. I'm going to read it to you, and we're going to discuss it. And he says, adventurers Larry Williams and Bob Cornuke in a recent reprinted book claim that the Bible over and over states clearly that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. Now, not shown on this presentation, all these numbers that I have highlighted in orange are footnotes, and I've given you the 9 pages of footnotes at the end to go look this up. Okay? And he clearly states that. An admittedly crucial point upon which the thrust of our argument will fall, and it's disproved biblically. And then Brad gives you another footnote. Howard Blum has retold their story in a new book, The Gold of Exodus, published by Simon & Schuster in 1998. Cornuke has now come out with his own separate book in 2000. There is a certain amount of irony, if not implausibility, in their argument, which is in essence trying to take Mount Sinai out of the Sinai. Okay? What they mean by Arabia is modern Saudi Arabia. And I don't know what Brad tried to type there where it says the route standing. And I just put in spelling in there. I just talked to Brad the other day and I forgot to ask him what he intended to write there. Is you know, and the route standing is no statement in the Bible or other ancient source that places Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. So despite their claims, there just isn't anything. And by whatever ancient name, in this case, ancient Saudi Arabia was Midian. Okay? In fact, it's quite the reverse. Mount Sinai is clearly placed outside of Saudi Arabia and right on the Sinai Peninsula as we would expect. In Exodus 18:27 states that while the Israelites were camped near Sinai, Moses sent his Midianite, read that, Saudi Arabian father-in-law Jethro back to his own country of Midian. Okay? Clearly Sinai and northwestern Saudi Arabia, Midian, were two different locations. Making the statement signals the importance of action. It was not a trivial event or insignificant journey for Jethro to go back to Midian. Okay? And this is why it's in there. So if you're going to tell me it's in Midian, you got to deal with the fact that Moses' father-in-law was at Sinai and had to go back to Midian in his own country. Okay? The incident was repeated about a year hence on a later visit to Mount Sinai by Moses, Midianite father-in-law, and nephew Hobab, which is in Numbers 10:29-31. Moses asked him to stay and guide the Israelites to the promised land, but he declined, saying he would return to my own land, Midian, and my own people, Midianites, from Sinai. Okay? He did not want to go on a long journey with Moses in the land of Moses' people, Horeb's land, in what is modern Saudi Arabia, was clearly not the same land that they were at in Mount Sinai, and not the same land where they were going, which is Canaan. Okay? Which were national and geopolitical entities spread across the great distance, requiring expert guide to navigate. The only response to these difficult arguments from the Bible has been to suggest that everything was really happening at Mount Sinai in Midianite Saudi Arabia, and that Horeb really meant that he was going back to his own tent nearby, which trivializes the watershed decision it's frankly absurd. If this conversation at Mount Sinai was really taking place already in Horeb's homeland of Midian among his own people, the Midianites, then Horeb would have said to Moses, you go on your journey, but I'm staying here in my land and with my people. Horeb obviously did not say that, and it was a parting of the ways and the two going in separate routes. Another variation of this back to the tent counter argument tries to split the difference and elevates Horeb's tent to a city, but that makes no sense either. The verses are not talking about Moses going to his own city, the promised city, instead of the promised land, and Horeb going back to his own city. You can see this. I mean, they have an immediate problem with placing Mount Sinai in Midian at all, which is Saudi Arabia, right? And this devastating biblical disproof of the Sinai in Arabia was first made in a book that Williams and Cornuke quote and use as an important reference, yet they never mention to disproof it to their readers. This is the kind of dishonest stuff I see in scholarship all the time, or what passes as scholarship. Okay? People will quote a book and then not quote the portion of the book that disproves their theory. And a warning to all of you right now that are using Google, Google's AI currently will produce references, book references, and that don't exist. Be cautious. It's absolutely fabricating sources for you. If you get a source out of a Google search and you can't go find that resource, it may not exist. Scholars have told me this is an ongoing problem with them, that it will tell them about a book and a date and a page number and everything, and the book does not exist. Okay? It was in Professor Menashe Harel's 1983 book, The Sinai Journeys, The Route of the Exodus. It was again repeated in Cornuke and Williams in December 1996 when they drafted this article was presented to them in advance of publication on their website in January 1997. And again, there was no response, though one was promised in writing. 4 years later, an unofficial rebuttal has been presented privately, but hasn't yet been made public to this date. Okay, so this is, those of you who are not familiar, a lot of times other scholars will hear about somebody making going to make a thing, and rather than be embarrassed, they send them a private communication and say, what you're about to say is disprovable by this effort. Do you want to take this into account before you present it? Brad did this to Cornuke and Williams and gave them the information in advance that I'm going to show you here. And they chose to ignore it all and go public with the claims. Okay? Biblical geographer Harel of Tel Aviv University was evidently the first to develop this disproof of Sinai and Arabian notion with his critique of Charles Becky's theory, which goes back to the 19th century. Williams and Cornuke got their theory from still another adventurer, Ron Wyatt. Okay? Oh, I missed a highlight of that number 4. But they make no mention of the theory's origin in scholarly theories, which in turn may originate in medieval Muslim polemics against Christians. Okay? In 1834, Becky proposed that the land called Mizraim, where Israel was held in bondage, was not Egypt, but Arabia, and the Israelites crossed the Red Sea over the Gulf of Aqaba instead of the Suez, so that Mount Sinai was to be sought in Arabia. By 1871, Becky suggested that Mount Sinai was a volcano and is what is now Saudi Arabia. He posthumously published a book in 1878, specified a mountain called Ertoda near Jebel Bargir, about 5 miles north of Elah. Harel comments that the passage in Numbers shows that while the Israelites were still on Mount Sinai, Moses' father-in-law was outside his own country, Midian, to which he wished to return, and it proves that Mount Sinai was not in Midian, was not in Saudi Arabia. I want you to understand, this is a big deal, because he's using the Bible to refute this idea. Okay? If the Bible is your source of truth, and your final source for truth in these things, the Bible clearly states that it's not in Saudi Arabia, right? The latest desperate effort to save the Sinai in Arabia and back to the city theory was in Bible Review magazine for April 2000. The suggestion that Midian was a city and that Mount Sinai was close by, thus supposedly solving the problem about the Bible verses in Exodus 18 and number 10s, we just reviewed above. And again, putting Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. However, this flies in the face of the passage in Exodus and Numbers and clearly indicates that Midian was in a land, not a city, and it was a substantial difference from Mount Sinai, requiring a special effort for Jethro to send word back and forth and come out to meet Moses in Exodus 18:1 and 5-7. There have been many, a capital city in Midian in the same name as the land, as indicated a few places in the Septuagint translation of the Bible, and this was often the case. In it indicates a few places in the Septuagint translation. Oh, this is often the case with ancient nations and their capitals, but it's irrelevant to the circumstances in the Bible describing the land of Midian, not a city. As previously noted, if Midian was a city near Mount Sinai, then Horeb should have told Moses he was staying where he was when the Israelites set out for the promised land, instead of saying he was returning to his own land in Numbers 10:30. The Bible treats locations close to Mount Sinai as interchangeably or virtually identical sites, e.g., Horeb was near Mount Sinai, and the two place names are used interchangeably, and he gives you a footnote where that happens in the Bible. If Midian was a city near Mount Sinai, then it's effectively the same location in biblical terms, so Horeb would have stayed and waved to Moses as the Israelites, and they left him behind. Now, biblical archaeologist Gordon France is a real serious scholar, okay? He's published an outstanding critique of the Sinai and Arabia theory in most recent issue of Bible and Spade Journal in the fall of 2000, published in February 2001 by the Associates for Biblical Research. And I give you a link on the website where you can find it. You can also find Gordon Fran's papers on Lambert's site that I gave you originally. Lambert has a lot of stuff. Franz thoroughly reviews archaeological evidence at Jabal al-Laz and its surrounding and the lack of evidence for the Israelites. He explains very persuasively that seeming anomalies put forward by the adventurers as proof of their claims. He also has learned that the official Saudi archaeologist is soon to release an exhaustive site analysis and formal archaeological survey. I haven't followed up to see if that's actually ever been released, but the Saudis have an interest in making Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. So I'm not looking at them as a solid thing, but I don't know if that report was ever produced. Now, Jewish historian Josephus, he lived around 100 AD, lauded in the Williams Cornut book as perhaps the greatest biblical scholar of all times. That's an overstatement. Vindicates the traditional location of Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. Josephus wrote, Josephus went up to the mountain that lay between Egypt and Arabia, which was called Sinai. If it's between Egypt and Arabia, it's not in Arabia. You see this? It has been suggested in rebuttal that Josephus was here quoting Apion, whom he was attacking, so therefore everything Apion said was a lie. This is a desperate and absurd argument. Josephus merely objected to a discrepancy in Apion's account of the Israelites' exodus about the number of days of travel versus the remaining camped, and evidently agreed with the statement of Mount Sinai's location between Egypt and Arabia. Otherwise, he would have attacked it as well, especially since it had bearing on the travel time issue, which is what he was talking about. Or he wouldn't have quoted it in the first place. Moreover, how on earth did Apion in AD 40 BC, even get the idea that Mount Sinai was well in the Sinai, if, as William and Cornick allege, this was actually a fabrication in the 18th century designed as a tourist scam to attract visitors to a traditional site of St. Catherine's Monastery. I'm telling you right now, Brad's showing you that there is history predating Christ that puts Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. Constantine's mother, in the early 4th century, looked at the evidence and concluded what was Mount Sinai. It is not a tourist scam from the 18th century. Okay? So when people make those kind of claims, it shows you they're not even being honest with the actual evidence that's out there. Now, Josephus agreed with Apion on place in Sinai between Egypt and Arabia, and then now, and nowhere disputes the fact when he could have easily admitted it if he had disagreed, or he could have made a point of disagreeing with it and counted it as another error by Apion, since he was taking apart Apion's contradictory statements phrase by phrase, including quoting a phrase as short as, "They came to Judea in 6 days' time," it was relevant to Josephus's argument against Apion's misinterpretation of the travel time of the Israelites across Sinai. The full context shows that Josephus had disputed Apion's slur that claimed the Jews' Sabbath was due to their taking 6 days to reach Judea from Egypt and then resting on the seventh because of groin disease. Josephus disputed this slur by pointing out that, among other things, a self-contradiction where Apion elsewhere had said the Jews had taken at least 40 days across the Sinai by stopping at Mount Sinai for 40 days between Egypt and Arabia, and that's the statement that Josephus quotes and agrees with. If Josephus did not agree that Sinai was between Egypt and Arabia, but thought Sinai was in Arabia, he should have said so and racked it up as another gross error by Apion, but he doesn't. And this is the problem. These are the arguments made by Kornuk and others. Placing Mount Sinai somewhere in Arabia is not new, contrary to what has been implied by Williams and Kornuk, but the specification of a particular mountain is relatively recent. The general idea goes back to about 1225 AD, when Muslim geographers began to arbitrarily shift biblical place names, largely because they had been identified with Christians, to the Sinai, from the Sinai to Arabia, as a kind of polemic against the Crusades. But this Mount Sinai in Arabia concept was purely a product of scholarly theories and propaganda, not of long-standing local traditions, which often can preserve genuine information of ancient geography and biblical sites, nor does it compare in antiquity with the traditions attached to the southern Sinai Peninsula, which can be traced back to about 100 AD and even further. That specific mountain, probably 100 AD, but in the Sinai, way before 100 AD. Modern scholars Charles Beck was a pioneer arguing for Sinai in Arabia, stating in 1834, without pinpointing a specific peak, and culminating in his book Mt Sinai, a Volcano, published in 1873. But upon his first-hand exploration of the Arabian mountains shortly before his death, Beck retracted his novel thesis of a volcanic origin of the smoke, fire, and rumblings on the Mount Sinai, thus weakening his case for Sinai in Arabia. Okay, so they're going to quote somebody who later retracted their own claim. Okay, at the turn of the century, Pan-Arabianism was popular among critical Bible scholars of the Wellhausen school. If you don't know who Julius Wellhausen is, one of the worst things that ever happened in biblical archaeology. Okay, this was a theory, passing scholarly fad that put almost the entire Bible story in Arabia, including the Israelite bondage, Exodus, wilderness wandering, etc. The Pharaoh was just an obscure Arab sheikh in the scheme, and its heyday was in the 1880s through about the 1910s. The entire Encyclopedia Biblica was written with this North Arabian slant. Okay, so he just gave you another book to beware of, the Encyclopedia Biblica. Another one. There's another one, Bible.ca, on a website on internet, that I'll tell you just stay away from. The specific Jabal al-Lawz site for Mount Sinai has been occasionally indicated in some scholarly references as a possibility, going back at least 2 decades prior to Williams and Kornuk and Bloom books. Such references included a map published by an encyclopedia in 1972, a map in the Har-El book published in 1983, which is used by Williams and Kornuk without credit for the site location in the maps, and in 2 popular books in 1975 and 85, and a well-known archaeological magazine in 1977. None of these sources give any documentation that Jabal al-Lawz site had a genuine local geographic tradition as Mount Sinai. No early map or reference has ever been cited specifically giving Jabal al-Lawz the name Jabal Musa, Mountain of Moses in Arabic. The only evidence is stories allegedly told by Williams and Kornuk, told to Williams and Kornuk by local residents, and not even claimed by the locals to have come from ancient tradition. It's not documented from any ancient sources. The name Jebel Musa remains strongly attached to the traditional site named St. Catherine's Monastery, as it has been for almost 2,000 years. I'm take a break from reading this article for a minute, okay? And before he starts the next citation, I want you to notice all these footnotes in this article. There will be 9 pages of footnotes at the end of this presentation that are going to be on my PDF, okay? He is quoting scholars. He's giving you books. The footnotes are going to have book and page numbers, dates, publication dates. That's the way scholars do work. What's done by people like Ron Wyatt, Bob Cornuke, and other charlatans out here peddling stuff to gullible Christians doesn't follow this. They're not scholars. They're not following any kind of scholastic standards. And they're out there peddling stuff to make money. And we as Christians need to learn to tell the difference, right? And the next time you see someone claiming that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia, ask yourself, is that person a trained archaeologist? Are they experts in their field? Or are they quoting experts? Or are they quoting people who aren't experts, right? Brad's sources that he's quoting are all experts in the field. And Gordon Friend's top of his field, right? And this is crazy to me that this stuff gets spread around. And like I said, there were hundreds of YouTube videos with Christians parroting this nonsense. Okay? The Williams Cornuke book is unclear as to when and how the traditional Mount Sinai was supposedly picked. And this, of course, has no bearing on how substantial or legitimate a geographical tradition it is. An unnamed psychic or seer is said to have been responsible for choosing the traditional Sinai site for Emperor Constantine, actually his mother, right? But elsewhere in the book, they say this myth has arisen only in the last almost 250 years, okay? In a long-running tourist scam. And prior to that time, about 1740, numerous other mountains were claimed to be Mount Sinai, though no example is ever given by them. It's just a bald-faced statement in their book on pages 17 and 50. Their claim is patently false, right? Nearly 1,700 years ago, it was Constantine's devout Christian mother, Empress Helena, around 330 AD, who chose sites for a church. She did not do it to set up a tourist scam, but for humanitarian reasons, to build a church and protect the monks from murderous raids by nomads. According to the tradition, a church was built at the place where the local monks pointed to out and they believed was the burning bush. Hence, the site was already well known as Mount Sinai by the time Constantine's mother showed up, right? About 550, Emperor Justinian built a fortified monastery to replace this church, likewise also dedicated to the Virgin Mary, which still stands today. Much later, the monastery took on the name St. Catherine, and the earliest mentions perhaps are about 1244. And contrary to the claim that prior to 1740 numerous other mountains were claimed to be Mount Sinai, it was not until Lipsius' proposal in 1845 that any other specific mountain was proposed as Jebel Musa, or ever suggested for Mount Sinai. Earlier, when Muslim scholars arbitrarily placed Mount Sinai in Arabia, they did not single out a particular mountain. Okay? And, in recent weeks, I've done some work on what Muslims have done and what Islam did. And what you've been taught about that is not true, right? They attacked, they were very much instrumental in putting Europe into the Dark Ages by their raids and different stuff, and then they presented themselves as the purveyors of all knowledge, and certainly there was some increases in knowledge, especially in the Baghdad area, and during Muslim control. But the way it's presented and the way the Crusades are presented, this is all propaganda. There's evidence of early Jewish pilgrimages that led to identification of sacred sites later adopted by Christian travelers, though it is in some dispute, right? One careful scholar of geography and Exodus route, Graham Davies of Cambridge University, has argued that the late Tanaitic period, about 100 to 200 AD, for example, rabbinical literature described the distance between Faran and Mount Sinai as 36 Roman miles, almost exactly matching Egeria's later figure of 35 Roman miles, Faran to Jebel Musa. In other words, Mount Sinai equals Jebel Musa. To Davies, this shows that Jebel Musa, the later St. Catherine's monastery, had already been identified as Mount Sinai by Jewish pilgrims by around 100 AD. The current book, on pages 57, 69, and 70, completely misses the following statement in quoting from the Sinai entry in Harper's Bible Dictionary. In that reference, it states that among many possible sites, one can safely say that Jebel Musa or another mountain in its immediately southern Sinai vicinity remains the most likely candidate for Mount Sinai. Okay? They leave off the fact that it's in Sinai. Many early travelers confirm that the monks' tradition locating Mount Sinai at Jebel Musa, beginning with the visiting Syrian monk Julian Saba, who built another church there in 360, the Egyptian monk Amanias in 372 to 373, and the intrepid Lady Aguirre from France and Spain in 383. Aguirre wrote with such sharp observation of the landscape of her extensive travels through the Holy Land, given an estimated mileage and travel times that Egyptologists and biblical archaeologists minutely pore over her story for clues as to whereabouts of Pharaoh's stored cities of Pithom and Ramses, the sites along the route of the Exodus, and the conquered cities of Bethel and Ai in the Promised Land, and other biblical places. These all come from Lady writing down detailed notes in 372 and 373 AD. Okay? The current book likewise attributes the traditional Red Sea crossing to the Gulf of Suez to an unnamed 16th century mystic who claimed she had a revelation. Okay? Okay, so this, I heard it. I was in a dream. I don't know. You don't even give me the name of the mystic, right? But the identification of the Suez dates back to at least Aguirre in 383. The Osiris in AD 415, and Cosmos in I'm going to butcher these names. Indicoples, right? Cosmos the India sailor in 550, Antonius 570. Even earlier, the name Clisma, given in ancient Greco-Roman days to a place near modern-day town of Suez, reflects the local tradition of a watery cataclysm, Greek for flood or surging inundation, that overwhelmed Pharaoh's army. So they put the crossing up by the town of Suez for all these centuries. But a mystic, an unnamed mystic, had a dream and changed the location, right? In the Apostle Paul's time, Arabia covered a wide area that included the Sinai Peninsula, as well as what we now call Saudi Arabia, according to Cambridge scholar Graham Davies. A glance at most Bible atlases will show this. Thus, Paul's remark in Galatians 4:25 is consistent with Mount Sinai traditional placement in the Sinai Peninsula. If in Paul's day the Sinai Peninsula was part of Arabia, and Paul says Mount Sinai is in Arabia, that's not a conflict, right? It doesn't put it in Saudi Arabia. It puts it in Arabia in Paul's day, right? One investigator of Jabal Allah states that when he discovered the gold from the golden calf there using a molecular frequency generator, which one knowledgeable source, John Morris, says is actually a dowsing or divination rod, okay? Went over there with a divining rod and claimed they found gold. A molecular frequency generator is not a familiar piece of scientific equipment, despite the impressive technical sounding name. The current book refers to the site surveying by pendulums, okay? Another form of dowsing. The Bible cautions against such practices in Deuteronomy 18, Leviticus 19, and 20, or consulting those who use them, Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 18. The molecular frequency generator a fancy term for some dowsing sticks or pendulums, may be the same thing as a metal detector, sometimes mentioned. However, the metal detectors reported detection of gold from a distance of 2 miles seems to be an impossible range for an electromagnetic induction metal detectors, which are limited to a maximum range of just a few feet. So this is some kind of metal detector they got that can pick out gold from 2 miles away, right? Pretty impressive. And that's why they had to give it an impressive name. The current book states in some places that Sinai in ancient times was part of Egypt on pages 26 and 58. We can call this Sinai Egypt territory for simplicity. If so, it would prove that Mount Sinai was not on the Sinai Peninsula, because the Israelites would have to have left Sinai Egypt territory in order to be totally free of Egypt and then travel to the Holy Mountain. The book quotes the father of modern archaeology, William Flinders Petrie, to support this point on page 56. But the Petrie quote in the book actually states the exact opposite, that the southern Sinai was, quote, outside the territorial boundaries of Egypt. This is a problem you have. When people use a reference and then you go through the trouble, like a nerd like I do, and you go find the book and look up the reference and it says the exact opposite. Okay? I had this problem with Dr. Hugh Ross when he would make references, and I'd go find his reference book and it said the exact opposite of what he said. That's a dishonest scholar. And I know some of you are fans of Ross, and I'm sorry about it. He's not an honest scholar. Bob Cornuke, all these people, Ron Wyatt, they are not honest scholars. These are dishonest charlatans ripping off the church. Okay? Elsewhere, the book contradicts itself and correctly states that leaving the land of Egypt is necessary to get to the base of Mount Sinai, the traditional site. So even they can't keep their story straight. Petrie was supposed to prove that during Moses' time, the traditional Mount Sinai in inference formed a province of Egypt, and the Egyptian troops patrolled the copper and turquoise mines in southern Sinai region. However, according to the scholar who was a student at renowned Dean of Biblical Archaeology, William F. Albright, an Israelite march towards these mines would not have brought them into John Bright, a collision with the Egyptian troops, for the Egyptians did not maintain a permanent garrisons at the mines, except at intermittent periods when mining parties were at work. The Hebrews could have passed unmolested. Okay. I got another map for you. Now I want you to see on the left side is one of the traditional places for the crossing of the Red Sea. Okay? And they go down along the shoreline, they come to Sinai, and they come back up and they head off into Moab and Canaan. Okay? But what they have here is a second crossing across the Gulf of Aqaba on the right side. You can see it at the bottom. This is the map. This is where they plan to show you their crossing. But as I showed you on the earlier map, the supposed land bridge that they claim exists is not in the same location. And there is no land bridge at either location that they point to. And the current book states that if you look closely at the photographs of St. Catherine's, you can see there is no vegetation, right? But there is an oasis behind St. Catherine's, and looking closely at, one can see the tops of trees towering over the back wall of the monastery, even on plate 7 in the book, in their own book. The book states on page 62, I don't think there is anyone who will contest that it's impossible to graze a flock of sheep at the base of the supposed Mount Sinai, Jebel al-Musa. They're saying there's no way you can do sheep because there's no vegetation there. But if there's already a oasis there, there could have very well been vegetation at the time. But the Groenberg Atlas of the Bible has a large photo of just such a flock of sheep grazing at the base of Jebel Musa, the traditional site of Mount Sinai, in the plain of Erech Roha. Okay? So these guys say it's impossible, but if you look at the Groenberg Atlas in the Bible, you get an actual photo of somebody doing it, right? The shrubbery looks almost exactly like the vegetation in the photos of Jebel Allah's site, Plate 21, which is praised in the book as excellent pasturage and totally different from the supposedly barren traditional site of Sinai. The book inconsistently asserts elsewhere that the great Allah's site itself is in the Saudi desert, more rough and rugged than our U.S. Southwest, and is dry and uninhabitable. Of course, if Saudi Arabian site was truly dry and uninhabitable, then it could not be the true Sinai, could it? Because it couldn't have the support the grazing of the sheep either. The truth is that there is much water. It's much wetter climate in ancient times in the Sinai and elsewhere. We see that in Judges 5:4, which sustain much more vegetation than they do at present. The book claims that no brook or dry stream bed can be found around the traditional Mount Sinai, which is odd considering that surrounding wadis themselves, by definition, are stream beds. Travelers have reported for centuries up to 4 running streams around the traditional Mount Sinai. Ejira saw a stream there that was about 383 AD. There were bubbling springs seen there about the year 550. So Cornick says there's no streams, but you have other historians that all talk about streams at Mount Sinai. Okay. Now, Petrie's student and scholar, Lena Eckenstein, in her History of Sinai, has also described the reckless deforestation which has gone on unchecked for thousands of years, turning the Sinai of great fruitfulness into a vast wasteland. Forest once covered the Sinai valleys. Proof of heavy forest can be found in massive, possibly 100,000 tons of slag heaps left from the copper smelted by burning huge loads of wood in the Sinai Wadi Nasab, and a great bed of ashes from sacrifices burned with tons of wood at the mines at Sarabit al-Qadim. The current book concedes these places are not far from the traditional Mount Sinai. So if we know Sinai used to be covered in forest, the fact that it's a desert now doesn't support their claim, right? Gone are the Sinai's extensive tamarisk groves and enormous plantations of palms and dates, such as the grove of 10,000 date palms reported in 1335, the numerous fruit and vegetable gardens, and the numerous herds of gazelle, all of which were still in existence as late as the Middle Ages, according to Eckenstein. Pasture lands and which formerly fed sheep and goats were turned into spreading desert by introduction of the camel, a most destructive animal, she states, like a huge goat. And the problem with goats is they eat the roots. Problem with camels, they eat the roots. When you graze cows, they eat the grass on top of the ground. They leave the roots and the grass will grow back. You graze goats because you're using them for weed control, because they eat the root and all, and no plant grows back. The book argues that Moses could not have wandered outside of Saudi Arabia when he found the burning bush at Mount Sinai, because Moses was like the Midianites, who were not nomads, but in fact were sedentary culture. They didn't move around. They stayed in one place. They stayed in Midian, which is now associated with Saudi Arabia in the book. But then the book actually quotes two of its leading reference works on pages 69 and 70 and 73, the Harper's Bible Dictionary and Smith's Bible Dictionary, both saying that the Midianites were nomads. So here again, they claim they weren't nomads. They give you a source, and then when you go look up the source, it says they were. That's dishonesty, right? That's charlatanism. These guys are hucksters out here selling it to you. The Bible reports Midianites traveling long distances into Egypt for trade in Genesis 37, 28 and 36, and into western and northern Israel for war, Judges 6 and 8. Like the Midianite hosts, Moses could have wandered far outside of Midian and reached in Sinai. In fact, the Bible seems to say just that. In Exodus 3:1, where Moses is said to have led Jethro's flock to Horeb, Mount Sinai, the Hebrew word nahag actually means to forcibly and exhaustingly drive, not gently lead, suggesting Moses traveled great distances. The Amalekites are another case like the Midianites. The Israelites fought Amalekites near Mount Sinai, while Moses had his arms held up in Exodus 17. The book argues that the Amalekites stayed in Arabia, never venturing far as the Sinai in Egypt, so the battle must have occurred in Saudi Arabia, and that must be where Mount Sinai is to be found. But Josephus also located the Amalekites in the Sinai, the whole district extending from Pelusium in Egypt to the Red Sea, based on 1 Samuel 15:7. At first, the book incorrectly reads Exodus 3:1 to mean Mount Sinai must be west of the wilderness, and the book states that Jebel Allah's site from Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia meets that condition, but elsewhere the book claims Allah's mountain lies to the east of the wilderness. Okay? So you just make the text say what you want. You just misread it, do whatever you want, and go from there, right? Yeah, gonna get right next slide. Sorry, I know this is a lot. This is a long, detailed, scholarly article, but I want you guys to understand that when people put this out that don't do the work, and they're just little parrots, running on the internet or writing books, and they don't bother reading the scholarly material, you're going to get duped. Okay? This book by Cornu contends that God's presence on top of Mount Sinai supernaturally burned it in Exodus 24:17, Deuteronomy 5:23. Through the burning bush was not burned up in Exodus 3:2-3. The book is inconsistent in doubting at one place whether any evidence of such burning would have been left after 3 millennium, which they say it wouldn't be there in 77 and 78, but then claiming there's a present-day blackening on top of Jebel Allah's, which is unexplained in page 99, and the analysis of rocks at the base show that they have been burned, page 98. Plants may have been supernaturally melted right into the solid rock, it says. Geologist Dr. John Morris told me, meaning Brad, that Jebel Allah's rocks he examined is normal metamorphic rock typical for volcanic area it came from. There's nothing strange about it, nor any signs of plants melted into the rock. The book does not mention that Jebel Allah's is in a volcanic region. One of Allah's investigators still maintains that the rock from the site has plants melted into it, and promises to make available slides and other documentation. It hasn't been forthcoming. The current book seems to refer to various cut and polished stones as related to Exodus, yet occasionally admitting that they're from a much later date on pages 97 and 217. The Israelites were not allowed to cut stones. Exodus 20:25 and Deuteronomy 27:5, God specifically prohibits making an altar hymn out of hewn stones. Okay? If you're going to tell me these altars, what I don't even think are altars, but we're calling altars are from hewn stones, it excludes the Israelites as a possible source. The book insists that when Moses built an altar for burnt offering and fellowship offerings at Mount Sinai in Exodus 24:4, it was made of stone. The Bible states that God instructed Moses to make an altar of earth, not stone, Exodus 20, for burnt offerings. So the Bible says it's of dirt. They say it's of stone. Do you want to believe the Bible or do you want to believe these guys? Okay. The Bible then qualifies the instructions for future circumstances at other locations. Whatever cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you if you make an altar of stones for me. Do not build it with distressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. Okay, Exodus 20, 24, and 25. Later, the Israelites did not need to build such an uncut stone altar, but in the promised land of Canaan, not Sinai, in Deuteronomy 27:5 and Joshua 8:31. The book author states, I seriously doubt that an altar of earth would have survived all these years. Page 75, you think? But at another place, he almost seems to admit the altar at Sinai was made of earth as long since been destroyed, page 96. In that case, there would be no mystery why an altar had never been found at Mount Sinai. One flash flood would have made it wash away in an instant. Over the centuries, surely nothing would have been left. The book states that after many centuries of people searching for Moses' altar, Exodus 24:4, at the traditional Mount Sinai, no one has found anything remotely resembling it, nor has anybody found Aaron's altar, Exodus 32:5, or the golden calf there. We were told on page 75 and 76. Sorry. But travelers long ago, such as Algeria again, found what they thought were stone altars built by Moses and Aaron. When stones are not cut, it's hard to tell if a given pile is natural formation or man-made. So whether travelers were right or wrong in their observations of the landscape or in their interpretation of scriptures, it's not quite correct to say that absolutely nothing's ever been found. Thought to be found at the traditional site of Sinai, because it's certainly not correct that no one has ever claimed or even discussed the possible finding of altars, as this book insists. As for the survival of 12 pillars of Moses at Mount Sinai, the book author finds it difficult to comprehend what a mountain as important as this one would be defaced, or that its stones would be whisked away by someone. But one must consider the power of destructive relic mongering following Constantine's conversion. After Helena's pilgrimage to Mount Sinai was becoming one of the most favored Christian pilgrimage sites, even the famous supposed burning bush, though carefully protected by Helena's church and later by St. Catherine's fortress monastery, it didn't survive. By 1216 it was gone, having been taken by relic seekers. It is often said that pilgrims carry away with so many pieces of the true cross that a warehouse could not have filled them up. This is funny. They're all over the place. People claim to have a piece of the cross. Jesus couldn't have possibly, no human Jesus couldn't have carried a cross made up of all those wood if you put them back together, right? And it's most likely that the 12 pillars set up by Moses have been disturbed, removed through the ages, or that they're not recognizable as pillars because they're made from stones that are not cut, right? The book admits, that rather than pillars, these might be better described as low-lying teepee rings, or small stones arranged some 18 feet across and just 3 or 4 feet tall or deep on page 9. That's not a pillar, 3 feet tall. Possibly only 1 or 2 feet deep on page 210. These sound suspiciously like early Bronze and Middle Bronze Age rings, which are usually made out of small uncut field stones arranged in circles 6 to 20 feet in diameter, about 2.5 feet high. These are found all over the place. They found them at Jebel al-Laz, and they're saying, oh, these are Moses' pillars, right? Since only 1 or 2 of the rings were barely visible from underneath the dirt and rock, and none of this debris was cleared, it's difficult to see how one could know if there were any other such pillars existed, or if there was exactly 12 of them. The smooth marble pillars at Jebel al-Laz are most likely Nabatean. Same people that built, oh my God, I just drew a blank on the city in Jordan where they found the Raiders of the Lost Ark going there. Petra, the building was built by the Nabateans. Okay. So, sorry. Oh, he just mentions it. Huge marble column Nabatean temple at Petra in 40 AD appears to be out of the middle of nowhere. To paraphrase the current book, the unexpected appearance of such products of a high civilization in remote places is not proof for the link of Exodus. In fact, one must consider the wetter climate and vastly greater foliage at the time of the Exodus. And that's, he labeled all his problems and has headings in his article and called it like problem 8 above. I took the headings out to fit them on the slide. In ancient times, such sites might have been constructed in green pasture land or forest that have now been rendered as barren desert. The book under review states that caves of Moses or Jethro near al-Bad were previously unknown, but people in Saudi Arabia were contacted in an effort to find archaeological site lists showing these caves, but nothing was found. There appears to be no research or explanation of this site in any Arabic literature, according to the caption on plate 19. So they're going to claim it's the caves of Moses and Jethro, and there's no documentation supporting it. Right? However, the caves of Shoaibed near Alban are well known, and at least one is sometimes called the Cave of Moses or Moses' servants, a cave of Shoaibed, and is a cave of Jethro too, because in the Quran, 11:89, Shoaibed was early pre-Islamic prophet, often identified in later Arab works as Jethro, Moses' Midianite father-in-law. Bedouins confused the different prophets Moses, Jethro, Muhammad, Shoaibed, Salih, et al., often recording the same place as having been visited by each of them. Okay, none of the alleged satellite photos that are supposed to show the ancient Israelite marching in trails and campsites along the Exodus route, page 220 and 21, have been published as far as I know. This makes it difficult to study the assertions that have been based on the photos, or even to verify whether the photos exist. The book asserts that Israelites' trail can be followed in an unpublished satellite photos from the Sinai Peninsula to Saudi Arabia, and it just disperses at the Jabal el-Laz site to claim Mount Sinai. It does not continue in any one direction or another from Jabal el-Laz. The explanation is from Mount Sinai, the Israelites supposedly started their aimless wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. However, there's a misconception of misreading the Bible here, as the Israelites did not march on in as if they didn't march in one direction from Mount Sinai. It was to Kadesh Barnea, right? From where they sent out spies to the promised land, only Kadesh Barnea, where they condemned to wander in the wilderness for the next 38 years in Deuteronomy 2. And the rebellion was not at Sinai, Deuteronomy 1:19 and 9:23, Numbers 10:12, 33, 13:26, and 14:25 all confirm this. If the real Mount Sinai is at Jabal el-Laz, then there must have been a continuation of the trail, at least to Kadesh Barnea, but admittedly there isn't. No satellite pictures are shown of the allegedly inferior trails around the traditional Mount Sinai. No scientific explanation is given or technical reference cited to the high-tech space photography method to precisely dating these traditional sites as trails only 300 or 400 years old at most. Okay? Again, you just make up facts, right? Make up evidence, put it in a book, make money, right? The book states that Bible scholars and archaeologists have poor math in misplacing Mount Sinai and Sinai. A glaring math error has been committed for thousands of years in figuring that the Israelites reached the Red Sea from Goshen in only 3 days' march. This mistake is said to be due to widespread assumption that Moses' request from Pharaoh for 3 days' journey in the wilderness to worship God, Exodus 5:3 and 8:27, also represents the travel time to the Red Sea, the Israeli escapes. However, the real reason scholars have thought mistakenly that it took 3 days to get to the Red Sea is the Bible lists 3 stops, Sukkoth, Edom, and Fire Karath, and it is assumed that each stop represented overnight rest. But it cannot be simplistically assumed that Israelites always camped at night, since the pillar of cloud that led them by day was a pillar of fire at night, so they could have traveled by day or night according to Exodus 13. Ancient Jewish tradition identified the eating of unleavened bread in haste for 7 days in the Passover, at the time occupied in the hasty travel to the Red Sea. For 7 days eat unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, because you left Egypt in haste, states Deuteronomy 16:3. If so, the Israelites took 7 days to get to the Red Sea. The current book concedes the possibility that the Israelites reached the Red Sea in as little as only 5 to 7 days. Okay? So, they have inconsistent arguments. And all you have to do is test them. Book states There's no mention in any work that we have been able to uncover that the land of Midian was ever reputed to be in the Sinai Peninsula. It is always to be east of the Sinai across the Gulf of Aqaba, where the kingdom of Saudi Arabia is now found. The argument is that if Mount Sinai is in Midian, and Midian is only in Saudi Arabia, then Mount Sinai had to be in Saudi Arabia too. But we just seen that Mount Sinai and Midian are in two different places according to the Bible. Exodus 18 and Numbers 10 says that Sinai, they left from Sinai to go to their own land of Midian. The book highly praised ancient author Josephus wrote that the land of Midian was located in the Sinai in the whole district extending from the Pelusium, Egypt to the Red Sea, where kinsmen of Moses' Midianite father-in-law had settled. Notice that Josephus does not make Sinai part of Egypt. Midian was placed at least partly in the Sinai by later authors Antonius of Placentia and Arab historian Mazriski. So have some of the leading Bible archaeologists and scholars of modern times: William F. Albright, H.A. Rowley, G. Ernest Wright, Roland de Vaux, Iram Negev, and others who overlap Midian partly into the Sinai. Yet the current book says one would be extremely hard to find any archaeologist or biblical scholar who would locate Midian and Sinai. Okay, with a hard press because they don't read scholarly work, right? The book author challenges the reader to check one's own Bible atlas to see if he is right, but he is not. See, for an example, the Grollerberg Atlas in the Bible, Westminster Historical Atlas of the Bible, the map section of the Revised Hastings Dictionary of the Bible, the Jewish Historical Atlas, all showing Midian partly in the Sinai. So they, they challenge you to disprove them, and then they're easily disproved if you actually look up the sources. That's the problem. The Christians don't look up sources. We just take what we hear and we parrot it, right? Now, I'm parroting what Brad has said, but I trust him as a scholar. He's got a long history of proven scholarship to me. The Harper's Bible Dictionary is not correctly quoted in the book to support the idea that Midian was limited to Saudi Arabia. The correct quote only refers to the center of Midian as located in Saudi Arabia, and includes the following capitalized portion omitted from the book under review here. The land of Midian in Exodus 2:15 probably refers to the center of the Midianite territory, the part of northwest Arabia bordering the Gulf of Aqaba's eastern shore. This distinction between the center of Midian and the outlying territory of Midian does not preclude the outlying Midian region as overlapping into the Sinai Peninsula. Contrary to what the book would lead one to believe, with its selective quotation, the map is another key source of the current book, where Harper's Bible Commentary puts Mount Sinai, Jebel Musa, at the traditional spot without a question mark, and the book claims it's used in almost every Bible atlas, without showing any alternative sites in Saudi Arabia. The book mentions neither of these facts. We're almost at the end of his article. Jebel al-Laz is unquestionably an interesting archaeological site worthy of further investigation if Saudi authorities will allow it. The identification of the site as the true Mount Sinai needs to overcome a host of problem areas outlined above. I remain interested in reviewing the evidence for this, and I'm in the process of gathering further data. So he wrote this years ago. There's been no more evidence. And like I said, I will give you all the footnotes in my PDF that he mentions. But this is a book that I read, and from that, intertransdisciplinary thing at Qualcomm that I talked about earlier. And I know most of you know I read books that most of the Christian laity are not going to read. This book is, 680 pages or something. It's got 40 authors. I'll tell you, by far, most of them think the Exodus is a myth. These are not friendly scholars. I think there's 3 or 4 in here that are friendly scholars. But what I find interesting is even the hostile scholars admit to some of the evidence. What Brad does is bring in the evidence from hostile and friendly scholars to the Exodus to show that the actual Egyptian evidence corroborates the Bible. Okay? And but I have a little sampling from this book just to whet your appetite for what real scholarship looks like. Okay? This is not a tomb of the people that we think is the Pharaoh during Exodus. This is Seti I tomb complex in the Valley of the Kings. This was discovered by a circus strongman, actually. It was discovered relatively intact. It had been looted of its wealth, but the walls were intact. A lot of damage was done by taking impressions on the wall. They press material on the wall and then peel it off to get like a 3D rendering of what's on the wall, and it peels the paint with it. And then some people went in and chiseled parts of the wall off. But it is in phenomenally good shape. And in this tomb, which is highly ornate, is a little room off to the side, sometimes called the secret room. And it has the story, what is called the destruction of mankind, in this little chamber over there, right? And I just want you to understand that this is where these pictures come from. And in that tomb, and I can only show you the ones that have been made public, there are even more, okay? You can see the water parted, right? A little blue, and then there's a bunch of hieroglyphics between it. There's water parted on the side, right? There's actually in here a map of the Exodus. You can see the Pharaoh entombed underneath the water when the water closes. But here's your next scene. After the water is parted, you get a bunch of dead soldiers floating in the water. Now, Egyptologists will tell you this scene in the destruction of mankind describes your path into the afterlife. But anybody familiar with the Exodus story, looking at this scene, is going to see the map of the Exodus, going to see the waters parted, going to see the drowned soldiers. There's another depiction where you have Pharaoh entombed underneath the water. You have the queen, Pharaoh's wife, coming down searching for Pharaoh in a dead body. Okay? All that is in this book. Okay? Now, not all the pictures. Brad has all those pictures. He shared a few of them in that book. And then he started going through all these pages of references. And what I'm showing you here, rather than going to read you off these references, is these are different Egyptologists who have all corroborated facts and pieces of evidence towards the the Exodus, right? And it just continues on and on in the book. And like I said, this chapter in that book was written by Brad. One of his references to the destruction of mankind, what the Egyptians called the destruction of mankind, it's the destruction of Egypt. They saw themselves as the center of mankind. They blame a god, and they use the Hebrew name of God for causing that destruction. Okay? That's pretty telling evidence from an Egyptian source proving the biblical Exodus. But this stuff, there are people actively trying to stop the publication of this book, actively trying to stop the publication of the data, right? Because they don't like what Brad has to say, because it doesn't fit with their date for the Exodus or their presupposition of what's going on. But I'm telling you, the evidence is there. How come I don't have... There you go. Got my blowhole behind me. So I'm just letting you know, if you're interested in scholarly evidence for the Exodus, it exists. If you want to read nonsense, just do an internet search for Mt Sinai being in Saudi Arabia. You'll get all the nonsense you could ever want in your life. Okay? So, as is my custom, I will put on a video. I will try to read the chat in the different various websites or different platforms and come back here if I can and see if there's any questions I can answer. So here's Knees, the groove edition of Knees.
Behold, bless ye the Lord, all ye servants of the Lord Most High, which by day and night standing in the light in the temple of the Lord. I fall down on my knees. I will bless the Lord. I lift my hands to you. You will never leave. You are always standing by my side. When men cast their eyes and when troubles rise, you are always there. I fall down on my knees. I will bless the Lord. I lift my hands to you. I fall down on my knees. I will bless the Lord. I lift my hands to you. All I ever need, Jesus, you have set me free. I will worship you alone. You will come to take me home.
You are all I ever need. Jesus, you have set me free. I will worship you alone. You will come to take me home. You are all I ever
You are all I
need.
need.
Jesus, you have set me
You set me free.
I will worship you
I will
alone.
worship you.
You will come to take me home.
I've fallen on my knees. I
Okay, so I see some gold pills get dropped and lemons get dropped over here, and I appreciate that support. I really appreciate you guys. I know this is a unusual day, the day after Thanksgiving is a lot of times a shopping day. Anybody that stuck with me, this was a very scholarly look at what was going on, and a little more erudite than I usually try to do. But I want to make sure that I cover this for you people, that you understand that you got to be careful of hucksters that come in the name of Jesus, hucksters that are out there taking advantage of what's going on, because they know most people can't go do their own independent research and validate what they do. And so I just thought this was important to do and take a little longer time. And Michael, if I wrote that read as R-I-E-D, I'll fix it. But it's reed, the reed, sea of reeds. It's actually marsh. And the most surprising thing about the reed sea theory is not that the Jews could cross it, but that Pharaoh would have drowned in it. I don't know how you drowned in a couple feet of water full of reeds. But that doesn't work. But that has been one of the areas proposed as the crossing is a reed sea instead of Red Sea. I've never seen anybody familiar with the actual Hebrew that would support that interpretation. And then what we're here, I didn't see other questions. I'm hoping I dealt with them all. Like I said, I provided you a link to Brad's stuff. Give me a little while to shut down the stream, and I will have the PDF up there, and you can go check all these sites out yourself. You have to look at the 9 pages of footnotes, but I think he thoroughly destroyed this stuff, these arguments, right? And like I said, God willing, I'll be back here on Monday, and we're going to be in 2 Corinthians, not Thessalonians like the slide said, but 2 Corinthians, and we're going to try to get that wrapped up. Thank you.